Hello everyone, my name is Kyle Schlegel. I'm a graduate of Garaway, the class of 1999, and just wanted to come today and talk about Ukraine, the current conflict. I've lived in Ukraine since I was 19 years old. I went over in the year 2000, and so this is year 22 for me there. This is my family. This is my daughter Bianca. She's a senior this year. She's going to be going to Kent State to her nursing program next year. That's my wife Anya, who is Ukrainian. She lives and grew up in the city of Kyiv. That's where we live as well. It's about 4 million people, probably the size of Chicago if you can put it into perspective. This is my son Egan. He's 10 years old in 4th grade, and my daughter Danae is a sophomore. And like I said, I left 22 years ago. My wife and I have been running an NGO for about the last 12 years. That's a non-government organization, not a big one. We've got about 50 staff. And we run a school, we do projects with orphans, families in need, many different things. And but Ukraine is our home. Again, I've lived there 22 years. This is a traditional Ukrainian dress wear. We all have our shirts on. This day is celebrated. It's a national holiday, and that's to show our pride for Ukraine. This is our house outside of Kyiv. Last night, interestingly enough, this is while I'm recording this, this door blew open last night from the shockwaves of bombs. Our friends that stayed there didn't latch it very well, and so praise God there's somebody in the village yet. He was able to go in and close it. Our neighbors were worried that maybe the Russians had already come in because they're pretty close to our town now and ransacked the house or whatever, but thankfully enough it was an accident. The door wasn't just latched, but the shockwaves blew it open. This is our dog Chunk. We had to leave him behind, but he's doing well. He's well fed, away from everything. So, yeah. So the Russian-Ukraine war. I just wanted to try to give you a little history of it. Let's go back to basically what we can say is, if I'm putting it in your perspective, Putin's a bully. He has had a lot of adventures in our part of the world, taking land grabs. He did the 2008 land grab in Georgia, where he annexed 2 parts of that, the Republic of Georgia. In Moldova, the Russians took a section of Moldova, and they have rebels there as well. That's been there a long time. Crimea in 2014, and two sections of Ukraine also in 2014. So he's a bully, and we know what we got to do to bullies. We got to stand up to them. Otherwise, they just keep pushing us around. So think of that perspective as I share what's going on, that he's really just a bully that thinks Ukraine is his own. He's, just like that. He's stealing our lunch money, only this time he's killing people. It's a senseless war, and I'll try to walk you through it and give you a little explanation. So let's go back a little bit to the Soviet Union. This is the picture of what the Soviet Union looked like. It had 14 satellite states. In 1991 it fell. So here's Ukraine right here. The map is a little construed, but that's Ukraine. Other than Kazakhstan, it'd be the biggest former Soviet republic. But in December of 1991, we know that the Soviet Union fell and Ukraine claimed her independence. Ukraine, though, was always oppressed, especially during the Soviet Union times. If you remember Joseph Stalin in history, he was a terrible, terrible leader. Some say worse than Hitler because he killed his own people. One of the things that happened, and my wife's grandmother lived through this, and my wife's great grandfather, her grandmother's father, lived through it as well, and I'll tell you those stories. But in 1933 and 32 and 33, Stalin cut off all the bread lines going to Ukraine. So he basically starved the nation. Millions died. It was a terrible time. But before that, when the Bolsheviks came in the early 1900s, so that would have been my wife's great-grandfather, he was a farmer. And so what they did is, he was a farmer in the village. He was actually quite wealthy at that time, had land, knew how to cultivate the land, knew how to work it. And what the Bolsheviks did is they came in, they did this collective farming thing. So they walked into the soldiers came into my wife's great-grandfather's village. They arrested him, put him in shackles, and marched him out of the town up to Siberia to the gulags. If you know your history as well, the gulags were the camps, right? The work camps that the Soviet Union created. And so he was marched out in shackles, barely dressed, in the middle of the winter. They just marched them up to Siberia. A year later, during the harvest, during during the springtime when they were ready to plant, the Soviets didn't know how to do it well, and so they brought him back. And so they brought him back. This is Anya's great-grandfather, and they forced him to teach them how to cultivate the land, how to plant and how to harvest. And after that, then they marched him, and he was never seen again. He went back to Siberia, and he was lost. We don't know what happened to him, but that was the early story of the Soviet Union. And then in 32 and 33 with the Holodomor, it was called the Holodomor, when the bread lines were cut off. My wife's grandmother, she died a couple years ago. She lived into her 80s, great woman, but she would tell us stories of how they had to eat bark off the trees and grass just to stay alive, and it was terrible. But there were also the stories of, and we've heard these, of neighbors in her village that had to live, and so and this is hard to hear, but they boiled their babies and ate them because there was just no food. And I know that's hard to hear, but I wanted to tell you those stories because it's real. And this happened in, again, 32, 33. So there was always a hedge of Russia over Ukraine, always an oppression, always a need. They just don't like Ukrainians. There's something about it in that world, but those are the stories that came out of the Soviet Union and the brutal regime against the Ukrainians. So when Stalin killed, I'll stand up here. When Stalin cut off the bread lines and killed so many Ukrainians, this part here of Ukraine became very, became very Russianized or Russified. They call it Russified because a lot of people died, and a lot of Ukrainians died from the starvation in this area. So Stalin brought in ethnic Russians into here. So this became a very strong Russian-speaking part of the country. All this down here, the Crimea, all this pretty much, I would say, east of Kyiv. These regions are more Ukrainian, but Kharkiv, this area became very, very ethnic Russian-speaking ties to Russia. And so the history, as I talk about later, Putin then used that as an excuse. Well, that's basically been Russia anyway for how many years? So it's basically ours. We can take it back. And I'll get into that later. But that'll give you a little bit of a picture of what happened during that history. But the truth is, most of these places associate with Ukraine. Even though they're Russian-speaking, we have two languages. You go to Kyiv now, you can speak Russian. Nobody's going to hurt you. And this part is more the Ukrainian-speaking part. So there is two languages, but again, even in these regions, most of them, and we're seeing now, the Russians are occupying Kherson, this big city, Mykolaiv. They're trying to get these, they're not welcomed. So, yeah, they may speak Russian, but they feel Ukrainian. And so, yeah. So that's a little history of the Soviet Union. So in '94, here's President Bill Clinton. Here's Leonid Kuchma. Remember, and this is John Major. So Leonid Kuchma was the second president of Ukraine. John Major, Prime Minister of England, and Boris Yeltsin, the leader before Putin of Russia. And so in 1994, we know the Soviet Union broke down in '91. So in '94, Ukraine was the third biggest holder of nuclear weapons in the world. And the United States and Britain, the Western Allies, NATO, did not want to have these nuclear states. So they made an agreement called the Budapest Memorandum. This is in Budapest, that Ukraine would be assured territorial integrity. They'd be assured security. No one would invade. They'd protect, as Ukraine looked right here, including Crimea. This is how in '94, when that declaration was signed, they said, we'll protect your borders. This is how Ukraine as a state should be. This is your borders. And so they all signed this document, and Ukraine gave up their nuclear stockpile. It was still under control of the Russians at the time, and so they were all moved up to Moscow and deassembled. But again, Ukraine, we've got people right here signing, saying, hey, Ukraine, we respect your territory. We're going to protect it. We give you assurances that nobody's going to invade, and your country is going to stay as a whole. Just give up your nukes. And it was, like I said, the third biggest stockpile in the world. So that was a big event. And obviously today, Vladimir Putin didn't get the memo because he's not protecting our territory integrity of Ukraine. And so basically this whole thing has been thrown out the window. And it was thrown out the window since 2014 when he took back Crimea, for that matter. So it's unfortunate, but that's what's happening. So we all know him. So Putin stepped in to power in 2000. Ex-KGB officer, very communist mind. He ran spy rings into East Germany. He was very well loved by the Russian government, and so Boris Yeltsin tapped him as his successor. So he came in 2000, and you can see Russians and Ukrainians are one people, a single whole. So it started very early that he started claiming Ukraine as his own, in a sense, that we're brothers historically, spiritually. The Orthodox Church, there's a single wholeness to our nations, and I would say, part of it is true. There is some common factors. They're Slavic in nature, but they're very different people. So the narrative is wrong in that they're very different. Russians and Ukrainians think different, they act different, but they're both Slavic, if I can say that, if that makes sense. In 2008, at a NATO summit, CNN wrote an article, and George Bush actually claimed this, that that was the first time that Putin said, Ukraine, hey George, Ukraine is basically not a nation. And then things started to go from there. That's when 2008, if you remember, that's when Putin invaded Georgia, took those two, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, those two regions. So 2008 is where he really started to get aggressive and openly say, hey, Ukraine, you're not a nation. You cease to exist. You don't even deserve to be a nation. So he definitely got stronger. And then came the claims that in the fascist government and all those things we're hearing right now, that Ukraine, we're denazifying the nation. So all these things came up. It's little Russia is another one of his phrases. Ukraine is just nothing more than a little Russia. And then the color revolutions, of course, throughout we'll talk about those next. Putin blames the West, right? His propaganda machine is so strong. When we look at Hitler in World War II and how he controlled the media, same thing in Russia. Everything is controlled by the Kremlin. Most media, there's hardly any independent media. It's the third most dangerous place in the world for journalists right now. We see the poisonings. We see the people dying. Getting thrown out of, all of a sudden they trip and fall out of a 9-story window. It happens all the time. Now, we don't hear about it as much, but it is a very, very dangerous place for an independent journalist in Russia. But again, he's very obsessed with Ukraine, and so he came into power in 2000. Let's go to 2004. This is the first time where Ukraine said no. It started to step out of Russia's orbit. Because remember, 2000, Kuchma, he was the second president, and he was very pro-Russian. So in came Viktor Yushchenko. His wife is actually American, and he pled to rid the country of corruption and build stronger ties with the West. Obviously, the Russians didn't like him. This is his face. If you remember, he was poisoned. So during his campaign, this is his face before, this is his face after. I'm not sure what the poisoning was, but they believe it was the KGB, the FSB that did it out of Russia. At a meeting, and so his face got all mangled. They barely saved him. I think he had to go to Germany, where they operated on him and saved his life. And then he came back, and during the balloting, so his opponent was this guy, Viktor Yanukovych, pro-Moscow, pro-Russian, from the east. Again, this is his stronghold. This is where all the industry is, all the criminal activity. Was always known in the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed. This was a very people got killed on the streets. It was wild. We call it the Wild West. It was like cowboys, people on the streets killing each other because the takeover was so hostile, right? So the business people that knew that it were what was going on in '91 came in and just took everything. So a lot of criminal activity came out of here, and that's where Yanukovych, his opponent, is from. So Yushchenko comes to the platform. I'm going to rid corruption, and we're going to go to the West. So the elections come around. This is after his poisoning, and they find, you see on video, just election fraud. People stuffing ballots. They were voting. Dead people were casting votes. Just obvious corruption from this guy, from that side, from Viktor Yanukovych. And so what happened was the Ukrainians started to take to the streets. It was very peaceful. There was no guns fired, no shots, but they said, listen, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We do not want to be aligned with Moscow, and we want a fair and free election. And so marched on the street for weeks. It was a very lot of people, but again, peaceful. And what happened was the Supreme Court of Ukraine decided, with enough video evidence, with enough pressure from the people, that, hey, this election was not fair. We're going to bring in international, international people, observers, to observe the next election, and we're going to rehold the elections. And so that happened. Again, people protested until that very end, and Ukraine had its first victory. And Yushchenko was elected president in 2005 after that revolution, because this happened in the winter. It seems like all the revolutions in Ukraine and wars happen in winter. It's so interesting. And so they overturned the election, and then Viktor Yushchenko became president. Now, he didn't do a great job. He got caught in some corruption scandals, like all the Ukrainian leaders, like all the Russian. It's a problem. Even with our current president, Zelenskyy, we'll talk about him. He hasn't been completely clean. None of them are. And so it wasn't a real clean campaign. Some promises were broken. And that gave a little bit of room for this guy to come back. And so he made his comeback campaign. Yanukovych defeated Yulia Tymoshenko. I don't have a picture of her, but she was the lady with the braids. Also real corrupt. We didn't like her, but we didn't like him less. So in 2010, he comes back to power. He has 2 criminal cases opened against him at that time. Not a good man. One was for rape. The other was for corruption and theft. So imagine that. Imagine, the president of our country coming in with those kind of criminal cases around him. So he steps into power, and he begins to orbit back to Moscow. Again, this is, and you can see right here, this is Putin's buddy. Okay, so Putin starts to put in his plan, okay, let's get Ukraine back. Let's pull them back away from the West, so that our security stands, that we can pull our brothers back in. So that's his whole ideology. He believes that Ukraine is his. So he has his puppet, his buddy in power again in 2010 to bring them back in. So in 2012 then, okay, so during this time, let's go back here. During this time, again, Putin is I think this is where his plan started. A lot of analysts will tell you too, this is where his plan for these regions starts, and Crimea. Because in 2010, he has a friendly leader to Moscow, his friendly president in Ukraine. And so what they started to do was weaken the Ukrainian army, the military. They started putting Russian generals in place of Ukrainian generals. And so the other thing they started doing is handing out passports. And again, this is 2010. To Russians who want it. So if these are Ukrainian citizens, hey, you guys want to have dual citizenship? Let's start handing out passports. So he slowly begins to do those things for later justification that, I'm just protecting my citizens. So imagine that, right? So think if that happened, think of Cleveland, Toledo. All of a sudden, there's a rogue regime in Canada, and they start, giving passports out to Canadians, or people who think, wow, there's ties between Canada and the United States, historical ties, and I want to be a part of Canada. So imagine that, Cleveland, Toledo, those cities, Trudeau or whoever it is, the Canadian Prime Minister at the time, starts handing out passports to Canadian citizens, and there starts to come these uprisings, right? And so imagine that, if you can, and then all of a sudden, then the conflict starts, and so we'll get to that, but start to think about those things. So he begins to start privatizing things, holding power, just doing not good things. And then in 2012, another revolution happens. Yanukovych promises to sign an EU association agreement with the EU. Ukraine would begin to trade with the EU. There would be relaxed taxes. It would really start to push Ukraine towards the West and towards the EU. And at the last minute, Vladimir Putin floats him a $4 billion loan, and he backs out. And people are just upset. Again, Ukraine wants to get out of Russia's orbit. They want to start choosing their own path. They are tired of that henchman up on the Russian throne controlling them. And so students start to come out on the street. 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds, college-age kids, they start to protest. And it's a small movement at first. Again, this started in November of 2013. Small movement. And in December, Yanukovych makes his first mistake, and he sends these guys out on the street. And again, the revolution at that time wasn't big. It was probably maybe 100 people that were camped out in the city of Kyiv. not a big one, but the movement was started. Hey, we want to go to the EU. And he sends the special forces out, and they beat the tar out of these students, bloody them, and it's all in the media. The journalists are there. And the day after that, or 1 to 2 days after, millions start to march, and they say, you can't do this to our kids, because these kids were young. You can't beat our students. And the revolution begins, called the Euromaidan. You might have seen it in Netflix. There's my wife, some of the pictures from that. So at first, it just became about going to the EU. But as it developed, and as people started getting shot, as we saw the ugliness start to happen in Kyiv, kidnappings, things like that, it became just about, let's get rid of this president. We want him out. We want Yanukovych out, and we want a new president. So it developed really quickly. This is my wife. We were involved, the tires, taking supplies. We were on the front lines a lot. And it lasted until March. 100 people were shot dead in Kyiv by snipers. These guys were not armed. They were armed with Molotov cocktails and tires. That was our weapons. Nobody had guns, contrary to what the media will say. But Yanukovych, again, brought in his henchmen. They think Russians were involved in that as well, because, again, those close ties, and they killed 100 people on the streets, young boys. This is, after the revolution was over, this is Yanukovych's mansion that he privatized. It's absolutely beautiful. It's got a golf course on it, huge thing. But he illegally stole it. The journalist, the day after Yanukovych fled, if you remember, he took off on a helicopter because he was so scared for his life, because the protesters, we actually won. And he fled with helicopters, billions of dollars, they think. I mean, he just robbed the country blind. But they found receipts for write-offs. Police chief in Kyiv paying $1 million, who later fled as well. I mean, just crazy corruption. Massive amounts of money. Just robbed the country blind. And so they turned this into the Museum of Corruption. You can go there and tour now, and all the proceeds go to orphans and social projects in Kyiv. It's great, but you walk in here and it's just amazing. I thought this was interesting because we went right after to just see what was going on. And you have maple syrup here. His glasses are there, I think, somewhere. And we thought this is probably his last breakfast that he had. Probably had pancakes and American maple syrup. But this is how it's so lavish. You wouldn't imagine. If you ever get to Kyiv, we'll take you on a tour. So that happened. So that then came back into the people. Check out Winter on Fire. It's a great backdrop for what's happening now. And it's such a great documentary of the revolution in Ukraine and what that was, what that meant. But again, that was Ukraine's second victory of a revolution, and a new president came to power. But I encourage you to watch this. It's a little heavy. You're probably going to cry, but it gives you a great perspective of what's going on right now. 2014, soon after our victory, Putin takes Crimea. He moves his little green men in, they called him. Again, remember, the Ukrainian army is weak, right? It's a little chaotic in the country, and Putin had been working with Yanukovych to make Ukraine weak. So they come in through the Black Sea, take that whole entire area, claiming that in the history is 1954 was given to Ukraine by Khrushchev. He gave it as a gift back to Ukraine, and so because his wife was a Ukrainian citizen, so in order to honor her, he gave us that peninsula. But Putin again says that was a legal gift. It's mine. I want it back. There's traditional ethnic Russian-speaking people, and he comes in 2014 on the 27th actually, and takes Crimea. He holds the citizens at gunpoint and does a false referendum and annexes the entire peninsula back to the USS, back to Russia. Again, they came in, sent their little green men in. You can see no flags, no insignia, no shots were fired, and he just took it and said, it's mine. And the world did nothing. I think the Americans at that time, Barack Obama said, hey, we're sending you supplies. I think it was blankets and pillows. Something ridiculous. A few sanctions. And again, the world watches as someone, in the 21st century takes just a complete piece of land. Then it gets a little uglier. And let's go back here to the map. Separatists start to rise up. Remember, these areas, Russian speaking. So all of a sudden, Russian separatists, start to rise up in these areas and take these two oblasts here. These two, we call them oblasts, they're regions, and start to take government buildings. And so there's an uprising, armed men, backed by the Russians. And so then they claim this is the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, and they claim that, and the Ukrainian army starts to mobilize, and they start to push them out. Slowly but surely, they're winning. Everything is good. They're pushing them back because, again, this is Ukrainian land. But then the Russians come in, and this is probably in August of 2014, start sending a convoy across the border of humanitarian aid, all labeled, everything like that, but really it's tanks and weapons. And they back these separatists, and they push the incarceration, or the front line, all the way out till probably about through here. They don't get the whole thing. That's what they want right now. But they don't get the whole thing, and the fighting stops for the last 8 years. So since 2014, we've had this battle between the Russian-backed separatists and Russians. And remember, they all have Russian passports. They all think Russian. We had friends in this area just a couple years ago, and he said that there's not even Ukrainian money here anymore. It's all Russian rubles. So think of that. It's not, the only people that recognize this too are the Russians, but it is basically taken over by Russia. The people have passports, so they're like, it's basically Russia, even though the world will not recognize it, and I'm glad they do. But so the Russians, again, help, and it's frozen conflict for the last 8 years up to this point. And this is some pictures of me. I visited out there. You can see some pictures of the war. It's been heavy fighting, back and forth since 2014. These are some houses we visited. I was right on the Russian border. We were taking aid out into some villages that couldn't get food early in the conflict, and it was devastating. You can see this is what war looks like. Buildings bombed out. A lot of people have fled. A lot of people have left to Russia or come back into Ukraine. But again, this is the eastern part, and just a few pictures of what war looked like. We had to be careful when we were in there. Ukrainian escorts, military escorts, took us because of the land. They have mined that area so badly, the Russians and the separatists, that you can't walk off paths. They said they just before us, 2 weeks before we came, they had some volunteers that just decided to go pick some flowers or something like that, hit a mine, boom, they're done, they're gone. So they said, please stay with us. We know where all the mines are. We met with the Ukrainian military there. There was a sniper there, a woman, amazing. Like they say, she was a beast. But they showed us through the binoculars. At that point, at this town, we could see across the front lines. You could see the Russian tanks, everybody moving. And so quite a remarkable situation out there. But again, Ukraine's fighting for their land. So now we bring to present day. Let's get to the present day conflict. That's the backdrop. Let's go back actually. So February 24th, I'm in America. We had just left. We left Monday. The conflict started on Thursday. I see Vladimir Putin come on and basically declare war against our nation that we love. And he says that he's going to denazify, demilitarize, and neutralize Ukraine so that they can never join NATO. That was his 3 things that he said. And he's going to do a special military operation in the Donbass, that Lugansk, that eastern region. That's all he's going to do. Blatant lie. So literally, I call my friend, I wake him out of bed. He's staying at our house that I showed you. And he's like, what? What's going on? It was early in the morning. I said, dude, get ready. He just declared war on the nation. I said, right now it's just the east. And then 3 minutes later, probably less than 3 minutes later, the bombs started hitting. And they started hitting military bases and air defenses all across the country. And it became the wide thing, right? And so the day went on, and I probably maybe 3 or 4 hours later, when my friend woke up and everything like that, I gave him a call back, and he said, Kyle, I have never been so scared in my life. I thought I was going to die. He was there with our dog. He said literally 3 minutes after you called, the bomb started hitting, shaking the roof, because the airport's right near where we live, the Kyiv airport, shaking the window, shaking the things. And he said, I thought I was going to die alone. And so he walked out. And of course, in our neighborhood, there were people outside. Everybody was gathering together. And he was okay. He got to the city, left our house. But that's what happened on February 24th. The special thing. And then he declared war on our country. One of the things that Russia uses is misinformation. I wanted to show you guys this. They control TikTok. They've got trolls. We call them trolls. They've got factories of bots that are constantly working to misinform the public, misinform the West. The Ukrainians do it too. It happens. You guys got to be careful what you watch. So these are I just wanted to go through because this is the first TikTok war. I was just talking to a friend who's ex-military, and he's like, Kyle, this is the first TikTok war, and it's what it is because it's misinformation, right? Where they're both battling for the hearts and minds of the West and whoever's watching, and it's mostly, of course, mostly young people on TikTok, and that's why I'm sharing that with you. So right here is three total propaganda machines on TikTok, and they're still up. Like they say, TikTok said we took them down. No. I just was on here a couple days ago. They're still up, and they're just feeding nonsense out of there. And so you have to be careful what you watch. Same with the Ukrainians. In a war, that's what happens, right? Propaganda and social media now is such a vital tool to push their agendas. And so be careful what you see. These are just three that you can see. So be careful. That my lesson is to be careful. Be careful what you watch. Analyze. Look for your sources. Make sure you're not you're fed in a bunch of hogwash of what's actually happened. So just be careful with that. And that's one of their greatest tools is misinformation. Like I said, the Kremlin controls all the media, and so they, that's what they do. Okay, Zelenskyy. Let's talk about him. This is our current president. He was a comedian. Used to do really funny guy, do great comedian shows, and he became a president. He did a show a while back called Servant of the People. You might be able to find that. A lot of Hulu, I think, has released it. A lot of American networks. It's called Servant of the People. But it's a story. It's six episodes of a teacher who rises to power and fights corruption and makes his nation free, Ukraine or whatever. Very simple man. And I think that's true of what he is. He's very simple comedian, but he's Jewish. This is what's amazing. So Putin gets on and says, hey, we're going to denazify the nation, denazify the government of Ukraine. And here's Zelenskyy. He's Jewish. His parents died, his great-grandparents died in the Holocaust. His grandfather was one of four brothers, and he was the only one who made it out of the Holocaust alive. He visits their grave sites very regularly. Remember, Ukraine has a large Jewish population. Baba Yar is a sacred monument, a sacred burial ground of where they had an annihilation of Jewish people during World War II. And unfortunately, the Russians bombed it just during this campaign. So it's an atrocious thing. It's terrible. They purposefully bombed this memorial site of the Jewish people in Ukraine, not far from Kyiv. But so again, the narrative. He's a Jew, Jewish background, loves Israel, loves the Jewish people, and he's not a Nazi, not a fascist. So Putin's completely false in claiming that he is. Let's see here. This is a video of Kyiv the first night, just to start telling you some stories. So again, I hope you enjoyed the background. There's a lot to tell, but these are some of the images now that my guys are sharing, that the media is sharing, that's coming out. This was on one of the first nights. So this was a plane that was shot down over Kyiv, right near where we live. Let me put play. Okay, maybe it's not going to play. That's okay. I'm going to show you what was going on. Oh, there we go. Nice. So this is, right over near where we live, not far from where our base is, our NGO where we operate. The guy said it woke him up, but our air defenses took down some planes, so that's good. And you're going to hear right now in the media that all Ukraine's air defenses are down. That's not true. And so, this is just a guy that shot this video. But you see what's happening. And again, capital city, 4 million people. Here we are in the modern day, 21st century, and it's like, what's going on? What's happening? How does the world let this thing go? Nice. Come on, there we go. Okay, so let's talk about the war right now. This is where, again, here's all the east. So this is where they say right now military control happens. I don't think it's completely true, because a lot of this area is just single roads that they have. Most of the where the Russians have been able to take the most ground is here in the south. And that's because, again, in 2014, when they took Crimea, they made a big military base. So they have a lot of forces down here that have moved up from the south. Kherson is one of the biggest places that's occupied right now. It's probably the biggest city occupied by the Russians. And again, this is all predominantly Russian-speaking, this area. But the people here are surrounding the tanks. They're fighting every day. I mean, I'm seeing some of the videos. If you guys look at some of the videos, surrounding tanks, like yelling at the Russian soldiers right in their face, and a lot of it's women, grandmas, who've been there for years, and they're saying, "We don't want you here." You're occupiers. You're the enemy. Get out. We don't need you. We are Ukrainian. And so that whole narrative from Putin that you're going to, and that's what he said to his generals and his soldiers, you're going to go in, they're going to welcome you with flowers. They want to be liberated. They want to come back to Russia. Complete baloney. All these places right here are just so, they're protesting, all these little towns, standing against the tanks, standing against the Russian soldiers, doing what they can to drive them out. Mariupol is completely surrounded right now. I have a friend who's lost contact with his mother and his sister. There's no food, water, electricity going in or out. We heard from a church there that they are drinking salty water because they have nothing to eat. They said bombs are literally falling all around their church, but it hasn't hit them yet. And those are some of the miracles and stuff we see. But this city right here is a key city. It's 400,000, Mariupol. I haven't ever been there, but I hear it's a beautiful city, but it's completely cut off right now. So in order for his strategy is to take that whole land corridor, he's going to have to take that, but there's fierce fighting here right now. Kyiv up north, they're coming at us. Analysts say they don't have enough soldiers to surround us. The south, again, is pretty open right now, so all of our supply lines that our friends are running out through there and going west. All the evacuees are coming out of the south. We just need to hope that that stays open. Kharkiv, second biggest city in Ukraine, millions of people, they've destroyed it. It's absolutely destroyed. Again, a key city, but they haven't taken it yet. The fighting's fierce. So they haven't taken a lot of big cities yet, which is a good thing, because the Ukrainian military and the volunteers have taken up such a fight. It's remarkable what they've been able to do and how they're holding off the Russians. This is where we live. Our house is here, Budapest. So the Russians are coming in. They're right here in this town. So I'm expecting our house. I'm trying to be hopeful, but before too long, I think we're going to get hit, and they're going to try to come into Kyiv that way. So right here is where we live, this town. Our base where we work, our mission, our NGO is right down here in this area, right here in this area, along the river. It's a beautiful property. So far, it hasn't got hit. Yesterday, they were showing rockets flying over, so it's getting closer to us. But this is where we have a team of about 20 people serving, taking food. They're feeding 1,000 people every day. They're evacuating people out of difficult parts of the city. Right up here, this area is a very difficult part of the city. They're trying to come from the north. A lot of dead, a lot of people asking us to help them get out. Irpin, 30% of the city is controlled of that suburb is controlled by the Russians, 70% by the Ukrainians. So this area right here is fierce fighting. Huge orphanage right here that we're able to get out. Our team and others were able to get a big baby orphanage, all the kids west. So there's good stories happening, very brave people. My team, super brave, going in and taking, and then again, they're 18 to 20-year-old guys, just taking people out, getting them rescued, and driving west. This is what it looked like in the beginning. If you want to see what a mass exodus, what refugees look like, they say that the conflict's going to bring 5 million refugees. 2 million have already crossed the borders into Europe, mostly through Poland. But this was Kyiv the first day. My city, it's a beautiful city if you ever get there. Wonderful city, but this is the main heading out west, so it's just clogged up. This is Kharkiv, I told you, the second biggest city in Ukraine. This is the train station. People just desperately trying to get on a train to get out. And this is Kyiv, the central train station in Kyiv. Again, people just desperately trying to get out. 2 million here, 4 million here. And this is just what a refugee crisis looks like. They say the border is just, our friends who were from that tough area, sorry, right here, they came out of here. Their house is still standing, but they left on the first bomb. It's my daughter's best friend who she grew up with. They waited in traffic for 70 hours. It's normally from Kyiv to the Krakow border, to the Polish border, maybe 10 hours, 10 to 11, maybe. And that's a long day. Usually, I made it there in 8. But there's 70 hours trying to get across that border. And so it's just created just a massive refugee problem. On the news, you might have saw, this is Mariupol. Again, I talked about that city being encircled. This isn't a strategic bomb. This is a dirty cluster bomb. It's not a precision guided missile. So they're just bombing. This is a maternity hospital. You saw it on the news. Babies, mothers killed. This city alone, they say 2,400 people have died, civilians. So they are just shelling the tar out of civilian populations, hospitals, schools. It's not fun. It's a dirty, there's war crimes. There's war crimes happening. And so it's really a dire situation. If you saw in the news, there was a lady on a stretcher that was being carried out. She's gone. She died. We just found out on the Ukrainian news that she lost the baby. Her pregnant. She was pregnant. It's just, the stories, guys, are just, it's horrifying, and it's just terrible. This is where I think our guys are driving in the town they drove through to get people out. Just shelled, completely destroyed. This is that Irpin bridge where I said the fighting was. They were waiting because shells were, the bridge is destroyed, dropping down on them. You can see the Ukrainian military here trying to help people get across this bridge, across the river. They're walking through water just to try to get out. It's just a tough situation. Here's our guys. This is my friend David. He's like a son to me. He's only 18. Let's see if I can get it play here. Oops. There we go. This is him. Again, he's one of our drivers that are evacuating people. They're getting out about 50 people a day. But this is them. They just got through here and picked up people from this town that was just destroyed. Artillery mortar strikes. So this is the things they're driving through. I mean, brave guys. We're trying to get them bulletproof vests right now because that's one of the things that's in demand right now. So again, young guys, if you're 18 years old, listen to this. That's how old David is. That's how old my guys are. Here's another video. And this is war. The mortars flying. He said they came under gunfire soon after this. A few bullets hit the vans, but not much. But this is artillery just flying overhead. So they're going into close areas and getting people out. Because again, Kyiv and east is hard. Here's some of the food we're doing. This is Diana. Diana's our pride and joy. She's a young girl that came out of the 2014 war. So this is her second round of war. When the conflict happened, she fled the east. She's an orphan, has no family, but just loves people. So she's helping feed, like I said, 1,000 people a day. We're taking it out to military. This is David and Anton. Again, I think, I said David's 18, Anton's probably 19, and they're the drivers that are driving people out. McDonald's has helped us out. God love the Golden Arches. Helped us out. They're giving us food to feed people. You can see this is Marie. She's German. Our team. Again, we're feeding 1,000 people a day out of our small NGO. We're not a big team, and we're taking 50 people out of the city right now every day. They go back and forth. They go to the west. They resupply. This is Wolfka, my good buddy. We had a trailer come in full of supply from Germany. Our Finnish girl, she's from Finland. She drove it across. Just brave. I mean, these are just stories of bravery. This is a company that catering that we know. They're good people. They're turning their catering company into just a soup kitchen right now out in their area, and so they're feeding people every day. And it's crazy, guys. The volunteer movement in Kyiv and in Ukraine is keeping Ukraine alive. Like, we think, oh, they have such a strong military. They don't have that strong a military, but it's people. It's the Ukrainian nation. Those people who are just doing everything they can to hold the Russians off. And their bravery is just unrelenting. This is a baby that was rescued. This is Vadik. Also his second tour of war. He fled the east as well. His town was shelled. He was forced by the Russian separatists to bury people. Some of them were alive. He was held at gunpoint. Crazy horror story. He's had a rough life. Grew up as an orphan. So he fled in 2014, and we met him and have taken care of him ever since. Just a great guy. But now here he is. This story is a baby. There's a lot of surrogates in Ukraine. Ukrainian women that hold babies. If a family can't have a baby, we call them a surrogate. So a Norwegian family came in to have their baby with the surrogate, and they got stuck in war. Can you imagine that? They're coming in to adopt this baby, bring this baby home. The baby's 4 days old. So we found them by some miracle, and we took the two Norwegian parents and the baby and drove them all the way. Vadik drove them all the way into Poland, and they're safe now in Norway. Great story. But there's so many babies like this. I mean, trapped in bunkers, trapped in hospitals. It's just nuts. Ukraine has 100,000 orphans. So imagine those kids that don't have parents. They don't have anybody. We heard a horror story of a friend in Kryvyi Rog. It's also an eastern city. He called and he said, man, I need help getting out 100 orphans. Their whole staff left except for one cook. Like, they all fled, and so there's only one cook left to feed them. They need to get out, and I think they since have gotten out. But stories like that from all over the country. Here's Diana again. A macaroni factory donated like 1,000 kilograms, a ton of macaroni to us. So now we have food to feed the soldiers and the people we're feeding every day. This is our kitchen at work. This is the police post and the military post, so we take it and we go feed them. The defense battalions in Kyiv, and they're so happy. Again, just everybody doing their part. People who aren't fighting, they're helping, they're driving. So Ukraine is just, the people are standing so strong. You know, and there's of course the Ukrainian flag, and we believe that Ukraine will come out on top, just because of the force of the people, the will of the people to stand up and fight for freedom. And that's what it is, guys. They're standing up and fighting for their freedom, for democracy, which Putin hates. The Kremlin hates democracy. I think that's the biggest thing. He cannot have a free, independent nation on his border. All his other guys, they're all puppets in the region, but Ukraine has always stood apart and led the way out of that former Soviet bloc of saying, hey, no, we want to integrate with the West. We don't want to be under anybody's control. We want to choose our own path. And that's what you're seeing right now. It's a fight for democracy in Europe, and the EU knows that. And that's why we need more help from the West, because, you know, Putin's not going to stop there. He gets Ukraine, then what? Then you got Poland, then you got Lithuania, you got NATO countries, and then there's a greater war. So, yeah, thanks for listening. It's been great talking to you. If you want to give, Mr. Jarvis sent that up to me. This is how people can give to what we're doing on the ground. All the proceeds, we don't have any really administrative costs. I'm just sending money right to the ground. So your money that you give will go right to the ground, right to the relief efforts that are happening. So feeding people, fuel for getting people out, medicine supplies, medical supplies we're sending over all the time, and we're buying them in Europe. So all those things are going right to the people on the ground that are helping. So this is how you can give. We appreciate any help. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. And Slava Ukraina. That's how we say glory to Ukraine.
Okay, so we got a few questions that our students submitted to us that we'd like to ask you. We'll give you 5. Okay. When you left Ukraine, were you fearful? Was the escape? Was it escape where you thought you might be in some trouble, or how did that go?
Yeah. Well, so Anya and my 2 younger kids left about a week earlier, and it was just to calm down everybody here. My mom and my family and sponsors and friends were putting pressure, like, Kyle, it might be time to head out. So we sent them away, and then Bianca and my oldest, we thought, you know, as long as her school's going and everything, let's stay. But then everybody really started to leave, and the pressure from the U.S. Embassy, they started sending more emails. And Anya, my wife, finally called on Sunday and said, hey, can you guys just book a ticket and come, just in case? And our tickets were all booked back for March 5th. We thought, oh, it's going to blow over, you know, even if there's going to be fighting, he's going to come to the east. And so it wasn't, we wanted to stay. Bianca and I were like, let's stay in the last, if anything happens, we'll go to Western Ukraine. But after talking and thinking about that, talking with the family, we decided to head out. And that when we left, I think there was no fear. It was just hope that, you know, if there's going to be a little conflict, it's going to be up in the east, we'll fight them off. But we didn't think that Kyiv would get hit. We really didn't. I was naive. And even in, you know, the U.S. analysis and stuff, I think that was the third scenario, that they'd try to take Kyiv and switch a government over. We just didn't think that would happen. So, yeah.
Okay, so now that you're here in the U.S., what are the plans? How long are you going to stay? Are you just going to go back as soon as it's over? What are the thoughts right now?
I mean,
maybe you don't have any.
Yeah, right now I think we're just not sure. We're taking it day by day. We hope to get back. I mean, that's always our heart, to get back as soon as we can. But, you know, we don't know what we're going to go back to, too. You just don't know in these kind of situations. Is there going to be a country split? That's been one of the things. Is Kyiv going to get taken, and then it'll be insurgent war for the next years to come? We don't know. You know, what happens. So our hope is to get back. Of course, that's our home, you know, and finish off. And Bianca wants to graduate with her classmates, and so for sure. Yeah.
So your citizenship, do you have a dual citizenship for Ukraine?
No, I have I have a residency. So I have it's a temporary residency. Every year I renew it.
Okay.
Yep. My kids are all born there, so they technically have Ukrainian birth certificates, but they're American citizens.
Okay.
But they could get dual if they want to when they're 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
Language. You mentioned there's 2 languages speaking in Ukraine. How many can you speak?
I speak Russian much more fluently than I do Ukrainian. My kids will do both, and they probably even speak a little bit better Russian than I do because they've learned the grammar better. I was lazy. I just spoke like a parrot, repeat everything over the years. But I can understand Ukrainian.
Okay.
Yeah. But I speak Russian better. So.
Okay. I got this question from a student. If you could tell President Zelenskyy anything right now, what would it be?
I would say, dude, I'm proud of you. Keep fighting, but I would say don't give an inch. And I think he's doing that so far, but I would say do not give an inch to the land, and you don't stop Don't let the nation down. Keep driving them out. Keep fighting. But please don't capitulate to what Putin wants. Don't give him anything he wants. He doesn't deserve it, even for the sake of peace. I would say don't do it. Don't give up an inch of the land.
Okay, and one more question. When you first heard that Russia was amassing troops on the border, how were you feeling, and how did this affect your actions and thinkings?
So what people forget is that in the fall last year, he did the same thing. He massed troops on the border as well. So he's done it. Again, the war started in 2014. It's been happening for 8 years. So we're kind of accustomed to it. We're a little bit numb to that saber rattling stuff that happens. So we thought, well, the West, why is the West taking so much interest this time? Because it's like, it's happened before. Like, why are they, and Zelenskyy even called out President Biden. Why are you scaring us or trying to do all these things that there's an imminent invasion? So I think even him was like, they've done this before. He comes in, he saber rattles, brings all his troops to the border, and then backs off. And so, yeah, I think that was, so I wasn't afraid. I thought, this is normal. We become numb to this.
We lived through this.
We lived through this already, for the last 8 years. And so I was like, yeah, it's Biden too, their intelligence isn't always right. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of with Zelenskyy on that. I thought, maybe, something's going on. We're on the ground. Ukrainian intelligence isn't probably as good as American, but I know American intelligence has been wrong before. Mm-hmm. So that's what we were thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, appreciate you coming, talking to us, and to the student body. Really enjoyed it, and we're just hope that you can get back to your home, and we're praying for you and your family. But I can't thank you enough for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh.